I think it's super important to cover the results and the time commitments that you need to have in mind when you are approaching getting your first job, a new job, moving to a different country. The whole game is really rigged in many ways, and so we have to set reasonable expectations. So, how long will it take for me to get a job? Well, everyone's different, which is not the answer we wanted. There are many different variables. So, do you have a in-demand skill where there are more jobs than there are people applying? That's not common these days, but hey, you never know. What country are you applying to, or what city? If it's a super large market where there's lots of English speakers, then maybe you have a higher likelihood of getting a job because there's just more opportunities. How much experience do you have? Are you applying for jobs that have 5 years, 10 years, 15 years of experience? It really depends on that. Timing is something you will never be able to solve for, but there are better months for applying for jobs. For instance, in Europe, specifically in Denmark, vacation season is July. And so you're not going to get an interview or a meeting in July. In a lot of other parts of Europe, it's August. And sometimes you just hit it when there's like a good market, the economy's on its way up, and fantastic, everybody's high fiving. And the last part you can solve for, and it's the dedication that you have and how much time you're spending trying to get something going. Now, I can tell you without any shadow of a doubt, it took me just under 6 months to get my first job in Europe. But my second and third job took 10 days and 30 days, respectively. Okay, yes, I did say just shy of 6 months. Now, bear in mind this was passive job search. So for the first 2 months, I was doing like 3 hours a week, really not trying very hard to actually make something happen. I really started buckling down for the remaining kind of 3.5, 4 months, and I was putting in easily 25 plus hours a week. I was taking calls in the wee hours of the evening or morning in order to catch people as soon as they were getting up and really trying to get as many opportunities as I could. So, conservatively speaking, it took me anywhere from 450 to 500 hours in total to get my first opportunity moving to Europe. My results, I'll break them down very simply. I put in well over 3,000 plus applications. Now, I consider applications to also be a part of first time emails, introductions, connection requests. This led to 60 first phone calls or first phone interviews. Now, bear in mind, 2015 going into 2016, it's a little different there, but I did take a lot of crazy early morning phone calls in order to potentially get second interviews. I had 24 second interviews where I'm speaking with another person from the company. I'm past that initial screening. After that, I did 10 total assessments. I count some of the assessments as both personality tests and intelligence tests. I think they're requested by larger companies. Again, I think they're bullshit, but it is what it is. I ended up delivering 4 different test projects. These are completely unpaid project work or tasks that were asked of me in order to decide whether or not I had the chops to potentially work at that company. That resulted in 2 offers, one for a company in Vienna, Austria, and one for a company in Copenhagen, Denmark. I accepted that one company, and the rest is history. From the standpoint of being able to understand roughly what your ratio should be based off of all of the work that you're going to be doing, 5 out of every 100 applications will result in a response other than no, which is crazy when you think about it. That not a no could be, well, tell me a little bit more, or can you give me this other thing, or you know what, let's do a quick phone call to see what you're all about. The phone calls, that first call that you end up getting, usually 2 out of every 5 of those result in some type of like, okay, this is interesting. We like where we're going. We really enjoy talking with you. Let's do second round interviews. 2 out of every 5 of those results in what would be considered kind of this nice experience that then they're like, whoa, we're really thinking about considering you. Can you do a test project? At which case, usually, if you're at the test project stage, there's only a handful of remaining applicants. So, 2 out of 3 test projects should potentially result in some type of offer. And usually, those offers are hard to come by, but when you get them, it shouldn't be 1 out of 8. It should really be like 1 out of 2 that you end up accepting at the end there. I've put in basically the math here, so you're welcome to open this up and basically try it out yourself in terms of putting in your own numbers, or putting in a number that you come up off the top of your head to figure out, if I applied for this many jobs, how many of these would I have to do in order to get my first real offer. So mapping the workflow, super important that we understand how this goes. I think it's obvious. Most people have been through this before. If you haven't, this is a quick refresher. So we're going to basically do a lot of prep work, checking out the company. We're tailoring our resume. We send the application. The application is responded to. We get into our first video call. We have a second interview. There's an assessment or test project stage of this most of the time. You get an offer and then it's accepted. By the way, this is why I'm not using like very generic images because I find it super boring and not fun. So that's why I did the video game thing. Just play along. I don't know. It's part of the fun. So my results, if I were to put it down by the numbers, so 10 hours of prep work on an individual basis per the company that actually gave me the offer, I ended up putting in 3,000 plus applications, as I mentioned before. The application responses were 150 video calls. You guys can read, you get the idea. That is what it's going to take in order to get there. Why so long though, right? Like 2015, very different time when I was applying to get out of the US and come move to Europe. This was a pre-COVID world where remote working wasn't really a thing. And there was a extensive learning curve in terms of I didn't have a lot of resources at my disposal and I didn't know anybody that actually had moved out in a more full-time capacity. And yeah, it was really hard to find guidance. The idea of being a digital nomad really wasn't a thing in 2015. That is crazy to think about 10 years later how common it is now. But just for the sake of crazy argument, yeah, it was just a lot of trial and error. And there were very few tools that would allow you to do this at scale. I also think I had very little in the way of dedication, at least for the first 2 months. Totally passive and spending less than 3 hours a week doing applications was really not a great use of anybody's time, especially my own. I was very inconsistent. I lacked focus, and I probably could have cut the entire process into a third if I had actually buckled down and done it right. If I had used AI, it would probably have taken me a month. And that's just where we are. That's how the world works. So how can you get faster incomes? So how can you get faster outcomes? Well, it's fairly obvious. You need to prioritize a lot of the stuff that we're going to go through in this course. You're going to use better systems, meaning better workflows and better ways of getting this done. And you have a litany, a deluge, a massive amount of tools at your disposal. And I'll introduce you to a lot of these tools. But more importantly, within these different tools, you have resources and AI that is going to help you do this so much faster. We are dramatically reducing the amount of time it's going to take. You just need to put in a little bit of the work in order to get there. So some quick job search timeline statistics so that it's externally validated, not just coming from my big mouth. Make a guess. So the number of months the average job search timeline is in the US, the number of days the average candidate will be in an interview process from first contact to job offer, and the number of days the average timeline it takes to fill a position. So the job posting goes live to the point where somebody has accepted the offer and they are starting very soon. And the results, it takes on average 5 months for somebody to find a job in the US. It takes on average 23 days to have somebody go through the entirety of an interview process. On average, it takes 42 days for somebody within the HR department to publish and eventually have somebody accept and be hired within a role. These are the numbers. I'm giving you the data. To externally validate even further, I've included this really interesting video from this creator where they're basically saying, hey, this is the new normal in terms of how long it takes for somebody to get a job. So you could use your time in a better way and actually do it, I would say, more methodically, or you could be aware of how long it's going to take, put in the work, and try to really shrink that timeline much, much further down to something that's more palatable that we all would love to have, right? That's why I created this course, and keep following along. There's a lot of stuff to go into here.